Chapter 4. From this point he marched 2 stages, 10 parasangs, to the river Cyrus, which is 200 feet broad, and from the Cyrus he marched a single stage, 5 parasangs, to Isai, the last city in Cilicia. It lies on the seaboard, a prosperous, large, and flourishing town. Here they remained for 3 days, and here Cyrus was joined by his fleet. There were 35 ships from Peloponnesus, with the Lacedaemonian Admiral Pythagoras on board. These had been piloted from Ephesus by Tamos, the Egyptian, who himself had another fleet of 25 ships belonging to Cyrus. These had formed Tamos's blockading squadron at Miletus, when that city sided with Tissaphernes. He had also used them in other military services rendered to Cyrus in his operations against that satrap. There was a third officer on board the fleet, the Lacedaemonian Cyrus, who had been sent for by Cyrus, and had brought with him 700 hoplites, over whom he was to act as general in the service of Cyrus. The fleet lay at anchor opposite Cyrus's tent. Here, too, another reinforcement presented itself. This was a body of 400 hoplites, Greek mercenaries, in the service of Brocchimus, who deserted him for Cyrus, and joined in the campaign against the king. From Isai he marched a single stage, 5 parasangs, to the gates of Cilicia and Syria. This was a double fortress. The inner and nearer one, which protects Cilicia, was held by Cyanesis and a garrison of Cilicians. The outer and further one, protecting Syria, was reported to be garrisoned by a body of the king's troops. Through the gap between the 2 fortresses flows a river named the Xenopon, which is 100 feet broad, and the whole space between was scarcely more than 600 yards. To force a passage here would be impossible. So narrow was the pass itself, with the fortification walls stretching down to the sea, and precipitous rocks above, while both fortresses were furnished with gates. It was the existence of this pass which had induced Cyrus to send for the fleet, so as to enable him to lead a body of hoplites inside and outside the gates, and so to force a passage through the enemy, if he were guarding the Syrian gate, as he fully expected to find a Brocchimus doing with a large army. This, however, a Brocchimus had not done. But as soon as he learnt that Cyrus was in Cilicia, he had turned round and made his exit from Phoenicia to join the king with an army amounting, as it was said, to 300,000 men. From this point Cyrus pursued his march through Syria, a single stage, 5 parasangs, to Mariandus, a city inhabited by Phoenicians on the sea-coast. This was a commercial port, and numerous merchant vessels were riding at anchor in the harbour. Here they halted 7 days, and here Xenius the Arcadian general and Pasion the Megarian got on board a trader, and having stowed away their most valuable effects, set sail for home. Most people explain the act as the outcome of a fit of jealousy, because Cyrus had allowed Clearchus to retain their men, who had deserted to him, in hopes of returning to Greece instead of marching against the king. When the 2 had so vanished, a rumour spread that Cyrus was after them with some ships of war, and some hoped the cowards might be caught. Others pitied them, if that should be their fate. But Cyrus summoned the generals and addressed them. "Xenius and Pasion," he said, "have taken leave of us, but they need not flatter themselves that in so doing they have gone into hiding. I know where they are gone, nor will they owe their escape to speed. I have men of war to capture their craft, if I wish. But heaven help me, if I mean to pursue them. Never shall it be said of me that I turn people to account as long as they stay with me, but as soon as they are minded to be off, I seize and maltreat them, and strip them of their wealth. Not so. Let them go, with the consciousness that our behaviour to them is better than theirs to us. And yet I have their children and wives safe under lock and key in Tralles, but they shall not be deprived even of these. They shall receive them back in return for their former goodness to me." So he spoke, and the Greeks, even those who had been out of heart at the thought of marching up the country, when they heard of the nobleness of Cyrus, were happier and more eager to follow him on his path. After this, Cyrus marched onwards 4 stages, 20 parasangs, to the river Halys. That river is 100 feet broad, and is stocked with tame fish, which the Syrians regard as gods, and will not suffer to be injured, and so too the pigeons of the place. The villages in which they encamped belonged to Anabasis, as part of her girdle money. From this point he marched on 5 stages, 30 parasangs, to the sources of the river Dardas, which is 100 feet broad. Here stood the palace of Belasis, the ruler of Syria, with its park, which was a very large and beautiful one, and full of the produce of all the seasons in their course. But Cyrus cut down the park and burned down the palace. Thence he marched on 3 stages, 15 parasangs, to the river Euphrates, which is nearly 1/2 mile broad. A large and flourishing city, named Thapsacus, stands on its banks. Here they remained 5 days, and here Cyrus sent for the generals of the Greeks, and told them that the advance was now to be upon Babylon, against the great king. He bade them communicate this information to the soldiers, and persuade them to follow. The generals called an assembly, and announced the news to the soldiers. The latter were indignant and angry with the generals, accusing them of having kept secret what they had long known, and refused to go, unless such a bribe of money were given them as had been given to their predecessors, when they went up with Cyrus to the court of his father, not as now to fight a battle, but on a peaceful errand, the visit of a son to his father by invitation. The demand was reported to Cyrus by the generals, and he undertook to give each man 5 silver minae as soon as Babylon was reached, and their pay in full until he had safely conveyed them back to Ionia again. In this manner the Greek force were persuaded, that is to say, the majority of them. Menon, indeed, before it was clear what the rest of the soldiers would do, whether in fact they would follow Cyrus or not, collected his own troops apart, and made them the following speech. "Men," he said, "if you will listen to me, there is a method by which, without risk or toil, you may win the special favour of Cyrus beyond the rest of the soldiers. You ask what it is I would have you to do. I will tell you. Cyrus at this instant is begging the Greeks to follow him to attack the king. I say, then, cross the Euphrates at once, before it is clear what answer the rest will make. If they vote in favour of following, you will get the credit of having set the example, and Cyrus will be grateful to you. He will look upon you as being the heartiest in his cause. He will repay, as of all others he best knows how. While if the rest vote against crossing, we shall go back again. But as the sole adherents, whose fidelity he can altogether trust, it is you whom Cyrus will turn to account as commandants of garrisons or captains of companies. You need only ask him for whatever you want, and you will get it from him, as being the friends of Cyrus." The men heard and obeyed, and before the rest had given their answer, they were already across. But when Cyrus perceived that Menon's troops had crossed, he was well pleased, and he sent Glus to the division in question with this message: "Soldiers, accept my thanks at present. Eventually you shall thank me. I will see to that, or my name is not Cyrus." The soldiers therefore could not but pray heartily for his success, so high their hopes ran. But to Menon, it was said, he sent gifts with lordly liberality. This done, Cyrus proceeded to cross, and in his wake followed the rest of the army to a man. As they crossed the ford, not a single man was wetted above the chest. Never up to the present day, said the men of Thapsacus, had the river been so crossed on foot. Boats had always been required. But these boats, Abrochimus, in his desire to hinder Cyrus from crossing, had been at pains to burn. Thus the passage was looked upon as a thing miraculous. The river had manifestly retired before the face of Cyrus, like a courtier bowing to his future king. From this place he continued his march through Syria 9 stages, 50 parasangs, and they reached the river Artagerses. Here were several villages full of corn and wine, in which they halted 3 days and provisioned the army.